Hey everybody, it's Missy.
And it's April.
And this is our podcast, Sheelanagig. Hey, welcome everybody. Thanks for listening. We hope you're doing well. It's been a little crazy here in LA where April and I are with all these fires. It's been pretty darn devastating.
It has been, for sure. And we hope if you're listening, you're safe. And we hope the air quality is getting better. And we hope that things are settling down where you are.
We sure do. And it's just been so harrowing and difficult. Both April and I have had friends who have lost their homes.
Yes.
Our hearts are with you, LA. And, a lot of people who've been evacuated who are still waiting to get back home. Just praying for everybody and praying for some strength and through this really difficult time.
Yeah, for sure. Well, there was good news for my friend in Pasadena whose house is still standing.
Oh, good.
And that his utilities came on, and she was never so happy to turn on lights.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Those little things, Yeah. And I know, I'm certainly feeling grateful. We're, around 10 miles from the Eaton fire, but we've been okay, and air quality is awful. Not supposed to go outside, but other than that, just feeling really, really grateful. And just hoping that this containment continues and they're able to kind of get this beautiful city back on track, because it's been a tough one.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but thanks for being with us, and it's having a podcast like this that kind of gives us something to be excited about.
Well, absolutely. And to that end, it's your day for Sheela.
It is.
I'm excited to know who she is.
But first, I have to know how you've been doing, April. How have you been doing besides these fires and stuff? I know you went down to San Diego, got a little reprieve down there.
Yes, I did. And I took my little puppy.
Oh,
and we lost a puppy.
She lost Cody. I loved Cody. It's really sad.
Cody was actually an older guy. He was probably about 14. And we knew for a while he had a lot of issues, but we weren't quite expecting him to go. But on the other hand, we remember him with a lot of joy and love. He was a really sweet soul.
He was the best. I had a very special relationship with Cody.
You did?
I did.
Yeah.
I would come over
and the two of them would be in the corner cuddling together.
We would. Well, her little dog just got so much attention because he was just so little and cute and spry and young. And Cody was the gentle giant, this older dog, kind of shepherd mix.
Yeah, he was a shepherd mix, very soulful.
Oh, very soulful. And so, he and I just had this special connection. We did. And so I miss
the two of them
Cody.
used to gaze into each other's eyes
We
and
did.
understand each
We
other.
did. I was so sad. I cried a lot. And I'm so sorry, April. And,
What's new with you?
Well,
you?
It's been, obviously with the fires, it's been really heavy. It's been a heavy time, and it's kind of hard to get out from under that. It was tough because the very day the fire started, I picked up my daughter and her two friends from school to take them to volleyball, and I was rear-ended.
That's right.
Yeah, trying to merge, and I swear we were at a standstill. This woman must have gone into us at 60 miles an hour, accordioned my car. The girls could barely get out. And I'm just so glad they were safe. We all screamed. They were really shook up. I felt so bad. Fortunately, one of the moms was able to come and help. And and we are getting another car. So, that's the silver lining. This car was a little beat up from living in the hills here. I had a lot of scrapes. And, maybe it's a blessing, and it's a blessing that everybody was okay. Obviously, it kind of screwed up my back. My back was a little bit fucked up, but I feel like my back is better.
Good.
And then the good news I want to share is that my beloved mother-in-law, who I posted a picture on her Instagram, I don't know if you saw her. We like to call her Janet Flanagan. Jan Flan. April knows her too.
Yeah, she's a doll.
She's a doll. She's one of my best friends in the whole world. I love Jan Flan. If you're listening, Jan Flan. I'm not just saying this for you. But anyway, she had her 90th birthday, and we went to Reedley, California, outside of Fresno, and we had a big party for her with 60 people. And we had games and prizes and a sing-along, and she was just delighted, and we were delighted.
As you can imagine, Missy was the MC, and she just lit up the party.
Oh, you're so nice. I did get a few offers to host some other birthday parties, which, I'm not opposed to. So, I was like, okay, I could do that. Why not, That'd be kind of fun. But anyway, I was just...
And she also got some career advice that if she wants to give up everything she's doing now and become the recreational director at an assisted living facility, that she just had a lot of older people give a thumbs up.
They did give me the thumbs up for that. And I had several people mention that that's what I should be doing with my life. So, and you know what? I had this moment of like, that might be a good job for me a little bit later.
Oh, totally
Maybe not right now, but
somewhere.
That might be fun. That might be fun. I was very flattered. I was very flattered by that. So, and again, it was a great party. So we are going to dive in here to our Sheelanagig.
Please do.
Each week, of course, we present and explore our own Sheelanagig, a woman whose strength and perseverance has led her to greatness, who empowers us, inspires us. It could be somebody you've heard of, but maybe, we'd like to just share a little bit more. Or it could be somebody you've never heard of that you should definitely know about. So we thank you for listening. We welcome your comments. We welcome your suggestions, your questions. We'd love to hear from you and just create a community here. So keep listening, keep reaching out to us. Join our Instagram, subscribe to us, follow us. We'll do the same. And yeah, we're going to dig in here.
Yes.
We've been talking a lot since our recent episode with 4 Women in Red. We talked to both the director and one of the actresses. It was a really interesting interview and such an important subject matter. Missing and murdered Indigenous women, MMIW. And it really has gotten me thinking a lot. Mm-hmm. And you know me. I go down these little rabbit holes, and I've been doing a lot of research about it. And I came across... Pocahontas. Maybe you've heard of Pocahontas.
Pocahontas? I've heard of Pocahontas.
Pocahontas.
Most of us have.
Yeah. And she might be a household name, right? But her true story is buried in a lot of myth. And, that largely has to do with the Disney movie, right. I'm sure.
Yeah, not surprising.
And these myths have persisted, since the 17th century. And, again, ever since our recent interviews, I've been thinking about these missing and murdered Indigenous women. And a lot of the Indigenous community considers Pocahontas one of the first real-life missing and murdered Indigenous women. So I feel really compelled to share her story today.
Oh, wow. First of all, I never knew that.
Yeah, I didn't either.
And I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say, too.
Yeah. So there are some things, that are true, of course. That when we think about the Disney film, Pocahontas was presented as a young woman. She was romantic. There's a lot of triumph, but but honestly, her story really has a lot of tragedy. A lot of tragedy, probably more so than anything else. And it's true that Pocahontas, she was a proud Indigenous woman. She was the daughter of a Powhatan chief and the model of strength and courage. So let's just start out with her early life.
Okay.
They believe she was born around 1596 in present-day Virginia. She was the daughter of Wahaseneca, also known as Powhatan. He was the powerful chief of the Powhatans. Basically, they are a Native American group that inhabited the Chesapeake Bay region. And according to Mautapaunai oral history, Pocahontas' mother was Mataponai. However, little else is known about her. And it has been theorized that she actually died in childbirth.
Oh, sad.
Yeah. And Pocahontas actually wasn't her real name. She was really named Amanute. And she also had the more private name of Matawaka, which the Native Americans carefully concealed from the English instead of using Pocahontas, out of suspicious fear that if the settlers knew her true name, they could somehow harm her. So
they already
had this name for her. It started out, actually, which I'll tell you about, it started out in her childhood. Her mother was actually called Pocahontas. And it translates to playful one or ill-behaved child, depending on who you ask.
Is it like a term of endearment?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. But again, depending on who you ask, it always makes me think of my daughter who's Filipino or part Filipino. And I remember I had this friend and her mother would call her Maclavit. And I was like, what is Maclavit? She's like, oh, mischievous. And then this other friend of mine who's Filipino was like, no, that means annoying.
That's different.
So I like how this is like, depending on who you ask, it could mean ill-behaved child or a playful one. So her mother kind of had this moniker and people playfully called her that. And then the idea that, Pocahontas was born and she looked a lot like her mother and kind of had her mother's spirit. So just kind of as a nickname, they started calling her Pocahontas as well. And due to his wife's death, Wahaseneca was devastated, and little Pocahontas became his very favorite. And again, because she looked like her mother. And so by all accounts, she was just kind of her father's delight and darling.
Do we know how many siblings she had? Or?
Many, which I will tell you about.
Okay.
Many half siblings. Her dad had several wives, which was just kind of a normal thing when you were chief like this. So you often hear Pocahontas, of course, referred to as a princess, but she was not royalty in the truest sense of the word. Accounts of her early life indicate she was, yes, of course, her father's favorite, as we already established, but she was not in line to inherit her father's position in the hierarchy of the tribes, as Powhatan people lived in a matrilineal society in which inheritance of status came through the female line. So she would not have inherited her father's status. Her people did not consider her a princess. Only the English considered her a princess.
And did they consider her a princess because of her father's?
Yes, exactly. He was a chief, so in their mind, he's the king, he's the chief, she's the princess.
Royal family, got it.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's what made sense to them. Okay. So just to clarify, she was not considered, within the tribe, she was not considered a princess. So as a young girl, Pocahontas was raised by her aunts and other women of her mother's Mattaponi community, and playing was considered essential in her tribe. She loved to just play with the other kids, but also learning women's daily work. And this would have included farming, growing corn, beans, squash, making clothing, gathering firewood, and gathering plants with which to prepare meals. And even the daughter of a chief was having to work. It was just part of being the tribe. When she met John Smith and the settlers that came, she was not a young woman. She was 10 years old. And she, at that point, had just moved back to her father's Powhatan household, where she worked with her half-sisters and her stepmothers. And her father, again, had numerous wives. So Pocahontas had a large number of half-brothers and half-sisters who she would have helped to raise, and they also, in turn, would have helped to raise her.
Got it. So it's a big clan.
Yes. Yeah. And nowhere could I find an exact number, but large amount of half-siblings.
Gotcha.
So in the evenings, typical life would have consisted of her listening to her elders tell stories, as well as singing and dancing. And again, during the day, there were studies. There was a lot of work to be done. Pocahontas's father was made the leader and chief of his people around 1595. So at that time, he inherited control over several Algonquian language-speaking groups that lived in the vicinity of the Chesapeake Bay, where Richmond, Newport News, Norfolk, and Virginia Beach in Virginia are now located. So it's that area. Even more tribes in the area came under his rule through conquest, and they all paid tribute to him in exchange for protection. He was a very powerful man. So let's touch base about what we've heard about Pocahontas and her story. What do you, when you think of Pocahontas, what do you think about?
Well, when I was growing up, it was way before the Disney movie. I'm 64, so I didn't know about Disney princesses then. Well, I guess they were there, but anyway, I digress. What I remember about Pocahontas, and this is very sad, was my sister and I made a teepee, and we ran around the teepee going, "Whoa, whoa, 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 I'm Pocahontas." And I didn't eat, that was about,
April, you are so not woke. You were so not a woke child.
I was not a woke child, I admit it.
We didn't really know better in those days.
Yeah, no, it was completely.
And it wasn't like you were making fun.
You wanted to be.
I used to play with my friends too.
Exactly, and it was fun, and we ran around, and it felt earthy. It didn't feel, it wasn't intended to be insulting, and we didn't learn until much later how disrespectful it was.
Right.
And then when the way that I saw the Pocahontas movie was with my daughter, and I just remember a song, and I can't even remember the name of the song, but I fell asleep hugging her. So I don't even really remember the movie.
You fell asleep in the movie?
Yeah. Well, we were watching a video at home.
Oh, you were watching the video
at home. We were laying watching, and there was a beautiful song. My daughter was completely mesmerized, and I was out like a light. So that's the extent of my understanding of Pocahontas. Right. I confess.
Well, at least they made her strong
They did.
in the movie.
Uh-huh.
She's represented again as this strong, independent, free-thinking woman, which she was in many ways. That is all true. But yeah, I just remember like learning about her as a child, even before. Again, I'm not that much younger than you. I'm 56, but I remember learning about her, as a child in history. But you'd always hear about John Smith and how she saved him from her own father.
I think I've forgotten, because now that you're saying this, it's like, oh yeah, she was the hero.
Right.
Right.
And then she fell, they fell desperately in love, and she left her culture to,
and she followed him.
Right. This is what I think about, and this is what I thought, So yeah, there was all this misinformation that was perpetuated by John Smith, and by the English. And
are you about to tell me he kidnapped her against her will?
Not him, not directly,
okay.
not direct. It's okay. So let's just start with the story about the settlers coming to the New World. They come there, and you may remember, again, the John Smith. He's handsome, he's upstanding, he's a British captain. And in the movie, at least, and in the history that you learned as a child, that we learned as a child, Pocahontas falls madly in love with him. It's love at first sight, basically. And when her father decides to capture and kill Smith, she throws her body across him and says, "You cannot kill him. I love him," more or less. Does that ring a bell now?
Rings a bell.
Does it sound familiar?
Yeah.
Okay. So yes, most of the Disney movie in which hypersexualized Pocahontas falls in love with John Smith and eventually is willing to give up her culture is completely historically inaccurate. Yeah. She's not this little sex kitten. No, she's freaking 10 years old.
She was 10?
She was 10.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, she was 10. She was precocious. I'll give it that.
Yeah, but that makes him a pedophile.
It does. Although, I will say, things were different then.
True.
She did get, I'll tell you, she did get married at 14. So that's a lot different than 10, though, still. Okay, so in 1607, John Smith, an admiral of New England and an English soldier and explorer, arrived in Virginia by ship with a group of about 100 other settlers. They knew when they got there was some action going on. They saw some natives. They knew they were not alone. And of course, the indigenous people also knew they weren't alone. Who are these people invading, landing on our shores? What are they doing? They were very curious about each other. Mm-hmm. So one day, John Smith was actually captured by one of Powhatan's hunting parties. They had kind of realized that this guy must be the leader. Uh-huh. After watching, we need to find out what's going on here. So he was brought to the Powhatan's home at Wiro Wokomoko.
I'm impressed you could say that.
The accounts of what happened next vary from source to source. So in John Smith's original writing, he tells of this, getting there, having a large feast, after which he sat and spoke with Chief Powhatan. But in a letter written to Queen Anne, John Smith told this different story of being captured, being tortured. All these savages showed up with clubs, and Pocahontas throwing herself across his body to save him from an execution at the hands of her father. But it is believed that John Smith was a pretentious man and that he told this lie to gain notoriety.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Sounds a little plausible.
Yeah. He was quite dramatic. Okay. As people described him as dramatic, actually. What we do know is that Pocahontas first observed the English settlers when they landed, again, in what they would call Jamestown, Virginia, in May of 1607. And again, she was only 10 or 11, and she and Captain John Smith were never romantically involved, ever.
Ever?
No.
So that was just completely fictionalized.
That's just completely fictionalized and made up.
Well, that's reassuring because she was only 10.
She was only 10, exactly.
Yeah.
That part is, yes, for
sure. Do we know if she pled for his life, or was that even necessary? Was his life ever in danger?
I don't believe so. Mm-hmm. Here's the thing. This is interesting, too, because there's this whole thing about the English did a lot of writing, and John Smith did a lot of writing. Mm-hmm. But his stories, even in his writing, were different. He didn't, as I mentioned, at first he said he was invited for a feast and he met the chief, and then in this, the letter he sent to the queen, he tells of a different story.
Right.
He was invited, but then they were going to kill him, and Pocahontas, saves him. So right there's discrepancies.
Yeah.
And so throughout his writing, there is some discrepancies, right? But the thing about it, the native tribes were storytellers. You know how I mentioned at night they would tell stories.
Absolutely.
So writing wasn't a big thing. It was about storytelling.
Yes.
So a lot, because of just culture, people would say, oh, well, this is written down. This must be true. Instead of honoring that storytelling, oral tradition is every bit as true and powerful as something written. But a lot of people just kind of went with like, this is what's written. This is what must be true.
Right. Yeah.
So even now when you look it up, there are discrepancies. I think there are people who still believe that's probably true. I'm going with, I don't believe so. I don't think so. Based on what I have read and believe me, I read a lot, April. I went down the rabbit hole like I do. So that's where I'm at with it right now. So anyway, at this time, there were also some Spanish settlers who were coming in. Okay. Now, the Spanish settlers, they made the English nervous.
What?
I don't know. I don't know. The nervous the English were intimidated by, and so were the natives. And so in a sense, I get the idea that kind of over time, kind of the indigenous people and the English formed more of an alliance that the Spaniards weren't necessarily part of. And so Powhatan kind of grew to like Smith over time from the accounts that I have read. And this is also according to oral history and contemporary written accounts by the Mattaponi. Eventually offering him the position of leader of the colonists as recognized by the Powhatan people, as well as a much more livable area for his people with great access to game and seafood.
Nice.
So
nice deal.
Yeah, this is a nice deal. He realized you are kind of the chief of your people. I'm the chief of my people. Let's support each other. We'll
coexist.
Yeah. And let's kind of ward off the Spaniards together. It's kind of the sense I got. Again, I don't know exactly what was going on there, but that's the sense I got, that they were an ally in each other. But again, here we go. In Smith's published accounts, he wove a tale of danger, excitement, and romance. According to his account, Smith was dragged to two great stones that were brought before Powhatan. I want to mention that there's the Powhatan people, and then there's the leader of the Powhatan, he's referred to often as Powhatan. So I know that, it can be a little confusing. So when I'm saying Powhatan singularly, I'm referring to him, but the Powhatan people are also the name of the tribe. So his head was forced down onto the stones and clubs were raised. They were ready to beat out his brains, in quotations. When Pocahontas, the king's dearest daughter, got his head in her arms and laid her own upon him to save him from death.
I do like this dramatization, although not when you think when she's 10 and how, never mind. Go on.
I know, exactly, right?
Please.
But again, according to the Mattaponi oral and contemporary written accounts again, there would be no reason to kill a man who is designated to receive an honor by the chief. No reason. In fact, the ceremony was quite possibly one of adoption, since Powhatan therefore after referred to Smith as his son and a member of his tribe.
Oh, wow.
So that doesn't really make sense.
Right.
And additionally, children were never allowed to attend any sort of religious rituals or ceremonies. So Pocahontas, being a young girl of 10, would not have been able to throw herself in front of John Smith to beg for his life for two reasons. Smith was there being honored, and she simply would not have been allowed to attend.
That's hysterical.
So that kind of like knocks out his whole story. Yeah. Okay.
And you already told us he tended to be dramatic and a little over the top. So, okay.
Yeah, men can be so dramatic, you know.
John, y'all lost a lot of credibility.
I know, he did, yeah.
Okay.
So some historical accounts who claim that Pocahontas defied her father to bring food to the colonists of Jamestown, according to the history of the Mattaponi tribe, as well, has simple facts that can't be ignored. These claims cannot be true. She was never going on her own and sneaking food to the people. She was not doing that. Here's the reason why. Jamestown was 12 miles from her village, and the likelihood that a 10-year-old girl would travel alone are inconsistent with Powhatan culture. Additionally, travel to Jamestown required crossing these large bodies of water and the use of a giant canoe. So it would have taken a team.
Single-handedly
yes, she was strong. But I don't know. Yeah.
Okay.
So it would have taken a team of strong people to lift a canoe into the water to get them to where they needed to go.
Let's just say you're raising a lot of credible doubt.
Yeah. It is true, though, that they would go in groups. And, they were trying to create, again, an ally in the English settlers. They were trying to create, some peace. And Pocahontas was extremely, she was talented, she was intelligent, she was very lively by all accounts, easy to get along with, and really considered kind of a leader amongst her peers. And again, she was considered her father's favorite. So historians do speculate that her father selected Pocahontas to serve as a symbol of peace by simply being present as a child among her people to show no ill intentions when her people met with the Jamestown settlers.
Okay, so she was like a symbol of...
Right, so she would go along with them.
Right.
But she wouldn't go by herself and behind her father's back. And that was not happening. That was all myth. It is said that Pocahontas likely developed a friendship with Captain Smith and the other settlers. She was very talkative. She was very outgoing.
She was a missy.
Yeah, exactly. She was, and she loved language too. So she caught on very quickly to the English language and was interested in kind of learning the language. So she was delivering messages from her father and accompanying Indian men delivering food of gifts to the hungry colonists. So that is all.
So there was truth to that. She just wasn't doing it single-handedly.
Exactly. And behind her dad's back. Right. And, that was not happening.
Well, that makes sense.
She had a very good relationship with her father, too, from what I've gathered, and that she would not have defied that relationship. She respected her father deeply.
Gotcha.
So it is said that Pocahontas' intelligence, though, again, and her language skills, really helped to grow those relationships, and she acted as a go-between. And into her early teens, she continued to kind of serve this role. She was an emissary. She was kind of the emissary, right?
Very cool.
Yeah.
And impressive. Yeah.
Yeah. And she's often credited, with, again, in these English writings and stuff, she is credited, she and her people, but they, in particular, again, I think because she was the one who learned a little bit of the language and she was outspoken and she was the chief's daughter, they really point to the fact that she really helped them survive in the early 1600s. And John Smith claimed that Pocahontas not only saved his life, but he hailed her as the instrument to preserve the colony from death, famine, and utter confusion.
Wow.
So she
really gave her due.
Yes. So that, again, is probably true. Now let's address some other things that were going on during this time. Let's just talk about Native Americans at this time. This was summertime, say, for instance, it's summertime, and it's hot, and they weren't afraid to be naked. They were not afraid to be
Native American
to be bare naked.
Doesn't have the white,
exactly
Christian Judaic. We don't show our flesh.
Right, and so this included exposed breasts for women, and little or nothing for children. Men often just had like a little loincloth. This was just kind of this was natural. This was normal, but sadly, they started to find themselves really sexualized and targeted by English colonists pretty early on.
That makes a lot of sense because there is a very different manner of how we look at bodies and sexuality. I mean, I didn't know a lot about historically the Native culture, but I did have a Native American friend who really taught me a lot of traditions and practices, and so I have a deep appreciation and love for Indigenous storytelling and the very rich spiritual culture and just respect and honoring of nature, and the body was part of
sacred.
Nature.
Yeah.
Yes. And so I could just imagine the contrast between these English immigrants arriving in this very natural and respectful environment, and that being a clash.
Again, seeing them as savages,
Exactly.
They're naked and they're, this is just awful. It's awful. So sadly, a lot of the women and young children were targets of rape, and a lot of the Native women would often have to offer themselves in exchange for their children.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Just to keep their children safe.
Wow.
And the Powhatan people were shocked, of course, by this behavior, and they were horrified. They were horrified that the English government offered them no protections in all of this.
Wow.
There was just nothing. And by 1608, John Smith's role as the chief of the colonists had taken an ugly turn. So the colonists made inadequate attempts to plant crops to harvest. And part of that, again, was I reading, I said he came over here with about 100 settlers. All these settlers were businessmen. They didn't know what they were doing. They were coming here to find the new land and to make money but these were wealthy businessmen. They didn't know how to make things, build houses or plant shit, or they were just they were clueless. Yes, they were highly educated, but they didn't even think about having a wide array of people with different skills. They just okay, here's all, send all these wealthy businessmen over there. So they tried to help them to learn, they had tried to teach them how to, harvest crops, what to do, the indigenous people were trying to help them, but they just didn't really take it seriously, and they didn't really learn how to do it, adequately. And so Smith began to violently demand supplies and go into the villages surrounding and hold guns to their heads, asking for food, asking for whatever they needed, because they couldn't, because they couldn't have it themselves. They couldn't grow it or create it for themselves. So by 1609, there was a drought, and, the starvation and disease had ravaged the colonists, and they had become just increasingly dependent on the Powhatan to survive. And desperate and dying, again, they threatened to burn Powhatan's town for food, that they would burn down all the towns unless they were given food. So it became quite volatile at this point, which is so sad.
It is sad, yeah.
Yeah, and so, of course, because of the drought, the Powhatan was facing their own food shortages.
Right, yeah.
And they refused. They refused. So the colonists started burning down their villages. And they threatened violence. And that's, of course, around this time, or, building up to this time, that's when Pocahontas and the Powhatan people stopped visiting Jamestown and stopped helping them, because it just became volatile.
Yeah, sounds downright dangerous.
Yeah, just bite the hand. Talk about bite the hand that feeds you. God, right? It's just so disgusting. Yeah, the whole thing. So in the midst of the horrible and atrocious acts committed by the colonists, there was a lot of talk of the colonists thinking that they should kidnap Pocahontas.
Oh, my goodness.
They thought, what a good pawn she would be, right? And, she was the chief's daughter.
Yeah.
She was bilingual.
Right.
She was smart.
She was an important symbol of both colonies, the tribe and the colony. Yeah.
And so as she grew into a teenager, this became more and more of a possible threat, kind of looming.
Was she aware of it? Were the natives aware of it?
They were aware of it. Yeah, they knew. They knew just because of who she was that it was a threat. She was in danger. So they decided that, she was coming of age anyway. At this point, she was around 14-ish. So around this time, a ceremony was arranged by her father, and she danced with a warrior named Coquam, the younger brother of a neighboring tribe's chief, and she ended up marrying Coquam.
Was this something she wanted to do? Was this arranged?
Yes. Well, they believe that although it was somewhat arranged, she wouldn't have been forced necessarily, but it just happened that it worked out. He was probably from a Potawatomi tribe, so there was no political connections, which again leads historians to believe that she married him by choice.
Okay.
And not for her father's gain, for instance.
Right.
So, but, again, her father thought that the marriage would be a good attempt to keep her safe. She would join another tribe. They would not know what tribe she was or where she was. It would keep her safe. He just hoped that, going to Coquam's home village, and it was a little bit away, too. It was quite a bit further away. It was along the Potomac River. So that's what happened, about 14 years old. And about a year later, around probably 15 or 16, Pocahontas gave birth to her first son, and he's referred to as Little Coquam. Oh. Little Coquam. I love that. And around this time, there was a kind of a new settler on the horizon. His name was Captain Samuel Argall, and he was an adventurer. He had recently arrived in the Jamestown colony, and he was trying to make a name for himself. And of course, the word on everybody's lips was Pocahontas and how she needed to be kidnapped. Oh, wow. in order for them to prosper and survive. And she was the greatest pawn they could have in terms of being able to get what they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So he decided that, again, to make a name for himself, he was determined that he would go find Pocahontas and he would kidnap her as a royal hostage for the colony. And that way they could hold those negotiations with Powhatan. I always think in those times, like, how do people, there's no phones, there's no internet, there's no,
Did they have maps? They drew their own maps.
Yeah, I guess. But hearing of her whereabouts,
Yeah.
somehow he heard of her whereabouts. I don't know how. He came to that village and he demanded of the chief, brother of Pocahontas' husband, to give up Pocahontas or to suffer violence against his village. Overcome with grief at a horrible choice, he relented with a hopeful promise that she would only be gone temporarily. And, of course, this promise was broken.
Yeah.
She never saw him again. She never, or her child. I will say this. This is what's to come. I shouldn't give it away, but he was a big liar. So before leaving the village, Pocahontas also had to physically give her baby to the women in the tribe.
Oh, God.
Right before he left, Argyle said to the chief, "Oh, wait a second. I'm going to give you this really beautiful copper pot. Here you go." And he gave it to him. And he wanted that to be looked at as a trade. So he could later claim well, I gave him a copper pot for her. I mean, it wasn't like I just took her. I gave him a copper pot.
That makes it worse.
Oh, it's so awful. And so this is kind of akin to the way that Smith traded for corn by holding a gun to the head of the chiefs. It's kind of a similar ploy there, right?
Yeah,
right. A real trade.
Yeah, sure.
A real trade. Also, oh my God, this is so sad. Pocahontas was not aware that when her husband wasn't in the village at the time, he was out doing his thing. When he came back to the village, he was ambushed and killed by the colonists.
Oh no! Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh! What was
the poor chief of that tribe? His brother's killed. His daughter-in-law is taken. His grandchild is left without parents. It's just devastating. Freaking devastating.
Horrible.
Yeah. So anyway, Pocahontas was held at Jamestown for over a year, and she became very depressed and withdrawn during her captivity there. And the captors really feared for her life. They were worried that, she was, here she was. They finally had her, and they're going to be able to negotiate, but they were worried she was going to try to kill herself because she was so despondent and so depressed. They knew that this possibility would, keep them from getting their ransom demands from Powhatan. So word of the situation was sent to Powhatan. They basically said, we need you to send her older sister to come keep her company. She needs some company. She's really depressed. Can you send some family for her?
Oh, that was the solution. Nice.
Yeah.
Give us another one. Right?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So they sent her older sister and her older sister's husband to help care for Pocahontas, who at that time I guess was quite weak, ill, depressed. To keep her
for the ransom.
Exactly. So upon their arrival, Pocahontas confided in her sister that she had been repeatedly gang raped throughout her imprisonment there. And she also believed at that time she was pregnant. It's just fucking, it just gets worse and worse. It's so fucking depressing, but it's so important that the story be told.
Yeah.
I mean,
and it feels really insulting now when you think about the Disney movie and the songs and just sort of the myth around her. That was it's a form of misogyny.
Yes, it is. It is a form of misogyny. It really is. And it needs to be, I mean, I don't know what the solution is. Do you hide your children from these movies? It's hard. It's hard to shield them from the Disney monster. I shouldn't say that. It's hard to shield them from Disney.
And the Disney mythology that, kind of, no pun intended, but whitewashes these stories.
Right.
Like the Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Right, right. The thing about it, though,
gruesome stories.
The thing about it, though, when they're that age, how old was your daughter when she watched Pocahontas?
Oh, my gosh, she was 4 or 5.
My daughter, too.
Yeah.
So it's not like at that time you can be like, actually, she was gang raped and
right. And the other part
abused
of that
and kidnapped. This is totally untrue, Ellery, okay?
The movie did portray her as brave and adventurous, and there was a positive message for a young girl. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just, the Prince Charming comes and sweeps you off your feet and gives you a blue gown. So it had, in some ways, more, I think, of a positive and meaningful message for girls. But still, when you hear this is just horrific.
I know.
And the fact that you're right. Like, at first I'm thinking, why is she a Sheela? Everybody knows the name Pocahontas. But knowing the name Pocahontas doesn't mean knowing the story.
I know.
And this is really horrible.
I know. I guess you could say to your child, like, this is a story. It's not necessarily true. It's a fairy tale. This is a fairy tale. And even at a fairy tale, it's not the best told fairy tale. Because it still shows that she gave up her culture and, you know.
Right, for love.
For love, right. But when you are older, I'm going to tell you the true story of Pocahontas. Yes.
Which, of course, makes the kid just want to know now.
Of course. When I was a kid, that song "Only Women Bleed" by Alice Cooper.
Uh-huh.
I remember being in the car with my mom and my sister, or one of my sisters in the front seat, and them talking about how disgusting that song was. Mm. And I was in the back seat, and I'm like, well, what is it? What does it mean? They're like, oh, nothing. No, I want to know. I mean, men bleed too. I mean, I don't understand. They're like, oh, Melissa, no. But I was dying to know. So I had to ask every person I knew, like, tell me, like, only women bleed. Yeah. Then I ended up covering it later. Yeah, that's a great song. Well, not exactly. Anyway, so they contacted Powhatan right away, actually, after they captured her to start the negotiations. Uh-huh. So he waited for about 3 months after learning of his daughter's capture, and at that time he returned 7 English prisoners because they had both kind of taken prisoners at this point, and and some of the stolen guns they had taken. So he returned a few things, but he refused other demands, though, and much to Pocahontas' dismay, he relinquished his daughter to the English, agreeing to a tenuous peace.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
I can't believe he did that.
I know.
Wow.
So remember I was talking about how he sent his daughter and the daughter's husband?
Yes.
That was after a year. That was later down the line.
Wow.
And
so
she was depressed.
Sold her out. Her dad sold her out.
Yeah.
Obviously the English sold her out.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So during this time, the colonists were really pressing Pocahontas to become civilized. I say that with quotation marks, civilized, right? And they often told her that her father did not love her because he had not come to her rescue. And I'm sure there was part of her that
felt that.
That felt that way.
Yes.
Again, there's probably more to this story. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, what would that mean? You know, he's a chief of a huge tribe, and what exactly did they expect? Well, how much did he have to give up in order to? I don't know. I don't know what that meant. I don't know. It's not really for us to judge. But while in captivity, Pocahontas lived in the settlement of Hencreus under the care of a minister named Alexander Whitaker, where she learned about Christianity and English culture and how to speak fluent English. So they had her, completely...
Was this in between the gang rapes?
Yeah, in between the gang rapes. She was also taught how to be civil. Isn't that ironic?
Civilized, yes.
Isn't that ironic?
Oh my gosh.
Fuck.
Yes.
Oh my God. So she's learning how to speak English, and she eventually converted to Christianity.
I like the way you said that, converted.
I'm sure it was totally willingly.
Oh, sure, of course.
Yeah. And she even changed her name to Rebecca.
Rebecca.
They baptized her Christian.
Oh, wow.
And she was renamed Rebecca.
Oh, my gosh.
So as you can imagine, in the midst of Pocahontas's captivity, the English colony of Jamestown was failing miserably and continuing to fail miserably. And one of her captors actually was this widowed man named John Rolfe, and he had come over to plant tobacco. He decided he was going to come over to Jamestown and make a fortune planting tobacco, and he was actually under a 1616 deadline to become profitable or to lose the support of England on this
pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. Again, Rolfe had sought to learn tobacco curing techniques from the Powhatan, but curing tobacco was a sacred practice not to be shared with outsiders. So, I mean, it's not surprising he needs to learn these curing techniques. And why would the Powhatan help him with anything?
Right, especially at this point.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. So anyway, realizing the political strength of aligning himself with the tribe, he eventually decided, wait a second, what if I marry Pocahontas and then they'll consider me part of the tribe, and then they'll teach me how to grow tobacco. This is fantastic.
Ah, yeah, sounds just great. Just Ducky. What did Pocahontas have to say about that?
Yeah, well, it didn't really matter, you know. So he basically told her that he would release her if she agreed to marry him, which is such bullshit.
Yeah, how does that work?
Yeah, yeah. So she didn't really have much of a choice. Here she just freaking hates every minute of captivity, and why wouldn't she's being brutally
Right.
raped and stripped of her
Converted,
identity, and
right,
you know,
into
yeah.
this other civilized being.
So again, she was baptized Rebecca, and it was that same year in 1614 that she was married to John Rolfe. And it was actually the first recorded marriage between a European and a Native American.
Hmm.
And believe it or not, it was said to be a very controlling relationship.
Really?
Can you imagine?
Imagine.
Yeah, he seems like such a nice guy.
Real prince.
And of course, she was just doing what she thought she had to do to survive.
Right.
But sadly, as I mentioned prior, she was never allowed to see her family, child, or father again after being kidnapped. And I'll get to that.
Oh, wow.
She was never returned to her people, ever.
Ever.
Mm-mm.
And there's that whole story that she did it voluntarily.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
She did
Wow.
nothing voluntarily. No. So Mataponi oral traditions hold that Pocahontas's mixed blood son, Thomas, was born out of wedlock. And that the ceremony between Pocahontas and Rolfe took place, and there was still speculation at that point about who the real biological father was. People thought it was a guy named Sir Thomas Dale. We'll probably never actually know. So remember when her sister came with her
Yes,
husband,
yeah.
and she said, I
thought
think
she
I'm
was
pregnant. She was pregnant. This is her second child. The
Right.
first child, of course, was little Coquam. And this is her second child named Thomas Rolfe. And of course, he was of both European and Native American descent.
So wait a minute, did Thomas Rolfe marry her while she was pregnant?
Yeah, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah. And then they tried to act like,
Here's our baby.
the baby's so early.
And we're such a normal family.
Yeah. Who knows?
Okay.
So, of course, Rolfe was praised. He's the successful businessman. And, of course, he had the accomplishment of bringing Christianity to the heathen tribes.
Fabulous. It doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah, there he was with the lovely, colonized Rebecca on his arm, wearing, beautiful clothing and poised, speaking English. So she was just this propaganda piece, essentially.
Wow.
Hey, look here. This is my nice, well-behaved young native wife who's beautiful and does whatever we want her to do. And colonization, obviously, is just going great. There's no one getting murdered. There's no sexual assault happening. No, not at all. See, everything's great.
Right. Yep. Perfect.
Oh, my God. So Pocahontas, Rolfe, Rebecca.
Rebecca Rolfe.
Yeah, Rebecca, Pocahontas, Rolfe, traveled to England with John Rolfe and her son, Thomas Rolfe, also with Captain John Argall. He was the one who initially kidnapped her.
Yeah.
And also several native tribal members, including her sister.
Yeah.
So she wasn't the only one they were kind of parading about. And, though many settlers were committing atrocities against the Powhatan, there were many elites in England who did not approve of the mistreatment of the natives.
Oh.
So, but what do they do about it? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. So this bringing of Pocahontas to England to show friendship with the native nations was key to that continued financial support for the colonists.
Makes sense.
They really had to make this
Big
look
PR
like,
move.
yeah, this was all consensual. They were one big happy family,
family,
just. So while in England, Pocahontas got to meet King James and Queen Anne and the Bishop of London. She, of course, was given fine new clothes, and she sat for a portrait by Simon van de Pas. And you can see it online.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful painting. She was a beautiful woman. But according to the accounts of her sister, Pocahontas realized that she was being used and desperately desired to return home to her father and little Coquam. That's all she ever talked about. So during her travels to England, Pocahontas did run into John Smith. And she expressed her outrage due to the mistreatment of his position as the leader of the colonists and the betrayal to the Powhatan people. because he was the one who got the whole ball rolling.
Right, right. Yeah.
He was the one that her father entrusted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was the one.
Yeah.
So she was able to at least confront him.
Did anything come of that?
No,
But,
of course not. So after this journey and showing off Pocahontas to the English elites, plans were made to return to Virginia in the spring of 1617. And according to a recounting by her sister, Pocahontas was in great health while in England and on the ship preparing to go home, but she would never complete this journey home. Shortly after dinner with Rolfe and Argyle, she vomited and she died. So those tribal members who were accompanying her at this time included her sister again. And again, her sister stated she was in great health and decided that she probably had been poisoned because it was a sudden death. It
yeah,
was a
doesn't
very,
make
very
sense.
sudden death. And really, they didn't have much use for her anymore. I mean, not
Wow.
really, especially since she was probably very defiant
Mm-hmm.
and not willing the majority of the time. So theories out there, though, of course, range from smallpox to pneumonia, tuberculosis. But really,
Very
poison,
suspect,
yeah, poisoning kind of seems the most feasible
likely.
based on
Yeah.
the fact that it was so sudden and it was right after she ate.
Mm.
And she did vomit. So she died on March 21st, 1617. It's believed that she was only 21 years old when she died.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, all this happened. Think about this.
Wow.
They captured her at like 14, 15,
Mm-hmm.
and she lived to be 21.
Oh my
21
goodness.
miserable, I mean,
Wow. Yeah.
no, what is it? 6 miserable years,
Yeah.
essentially. Ugh. So, according to traditional knowledge, she was murdered. Some Powhatan representatives on the ship with Pocahontas reportedly told her father later that she was indeed poisoned.
Mm.
Whether they had proof of that, I don't know, but
Yeah.
it was really what was commonly believed.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, saying that she fell randomly ill and just died absolves her captors of any responsibility. So
Yes, it did.
that's what the English stuck with.
Wow.
And according to Mattaponi oral history, many of the native people accompanying Pocahontas on this trip to England were later sold as servants or carnival attractions or
Oh.
sent to Bermuda
Oh my gosh.
if they became pregnant after being raped and were sold then into slavery.
Oh.
So
wow.
all these people they brought who also were given fine clothes and paraded around to believe
Yeah.
like these are our friends.
Right.
Later on, they were just treated like trash and
Yeah.
sold as servants, carnival performers, raped, given to Bermuda as slaves. I mean, it's just so sickening, the whole thing. So instead of being taken home to be laid to rest with her father at last, Rolfe and Argyle decided to take her back to England, to Gravesend, England, and she was buried at the St. George's Church.
Oh, as a Christian.
Yeah, the very least thing they could have done is to bring her back to her father.
Right.
That is
And
the
honor
very
her.
freaking least thing they could have. Could they do that? No. And what's even worse, they never ever told of her whereabouts. So to this day, her whereabouts remain unknown. Her exact whereabouts. And they know that she was buried at St. George's Church, but apparently it's unmarked.
Oh wow.
And nobody has ever been able to find out exactly where.
Oh.
It is
That's so
horrible.
sad.
And poor Powhatan learned from his other daughter that his beloved Pocahontas had died, but had never betrayed her people, as some historians claim she did.
Mm.
She never did. Heartbroken that he had never rescued his daughter, he died from grief less than a year after her death. So,
I have a hard time with the dad's position. Although I'm sure, faced with the choices he had, he may not have had many. But still.
I know.
But what a horrible story.
It's awful. There's
What a
nothing
horrible-
redeeming. Like you're waiting for something redeeming to happen, and there's
Yeah.
it's sad. And I'm sorry that it's such a bummer today, you guys. And obviously, there's still a lot of discrepancies, and again, a lot of that has to do with oral language and
Right,
versus,
versus-
oral accounts versus
Yeah.
written accounts, and
Yeah.
the dramatic written history of John Smith.
Yeah.
But there are several books. There are, they've done a lot of research. So there's something called In the True Story of Pocahontas, The Other Side of History. Authors Cousteau and Daniel point out that their book is a reminder that oral history should be respected just as much as the written word. After all, written words originate from oral history that somebody eventually puts to paper, which is a great way to look at it.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Little aside, because I was very curious about what happened to both of her sons.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't find too much about little Coquam.
Yeah.
I did find a little bit about Thomas Rolfe. He stayed in England. Basically, his father returned to Jamestown, but he left his son.
He left his son in
England to be
Right.
raised by the minister. Didn't the minister raise Pocahontas? But he was raised by help, and he was educated in England. He never really, he didn't have much of a relationship with his dad. When you're wealthy and you are growing tobacco in Virginia.
You're mixed blood, and that might be a little bit of an embarrassment.
See, that's what I was getting to.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, he got what he needed, so it's time to just kind of separate himself. And the other thing is, if you look at pictures, Thomas Rolfe looks quite a bit like his mother. Yeah. He looks quite a bit like his mother. So I'm sure he wanted to.
There was a question whether Thomas Rolfe was the father.
That's true, too.
Yeah.
That is true, too. So he had no need to really have a relationship with this child. But he did return to Virginia as a young man to claim his father's lands after his father passed away. And he also met with his mother's people, the Powhatan. In about 1641, he was 20 years old at the time. And he eventually chose to fight against his mother's people in exchange for land and social status. Doesn't that suck?
That does suck.
I was
What a
hoping.
horrible ending.
I was
A horrible
hoping.
story.
I know. I was hoping when I went down that little tributary that like maybe he would have maybe he would have come forth and spoken out and been proud, and I don't know. It's just so freaking sad. So he became part of the English policy to control the land of his Powhatan ancestors. And it's just so sad. I mean, she sacrificed so much.
Her life, basically.
Yeah. And in the end, she was just a pawn for both sides, really.
Both sides. Yeah.
It's heartbreaking. I wish I could tell you something really positive now. So next time you think of Pocahontas or you watch Pocahontas with your child, or I don't know, think about it.
Well, maybe at some point there will be a retelling and more of an account for what.
But but the retelling is just so sad. I mean, it's important. It's history.
Sad.
It's history. And unfortunately, history has some very sad, unfortunate stories. And hers is one of them, certainly. And it does need to be told.
It does. I'm really glad you chose her today. And
history empowers us, and even the dark history empowers us. And it's a vehicle for change. You hope.
We hope.
You hope. That you can only hope. Yeah. And it's important to recognize this amazing woman who, I mean, she made, again, such sacrifices for herself, for her people. It's stunning. Thank you, Pocahontas.
And thank you, Missy, for bringing this to us.
Thank you. Thanks for listening, everybody. Until next time. Bye.